Brutus the Bear, the 800-pound grizzly that thinks he's a dog. Part 1. An unlikely beginning. The sun hung low over the vast Montana landscape, casting golden hues over the rolling hills and endless pine forests. It was a land where nature thrived, where the wild remained untamed, except for one unusual resident who blurred the lines between wilderness and domestic life. Brutus was not like the other animals that roamed these parts. He was an 800-pound grizzly bear, yet he didn't spend his days hunting in the woods or hibernating deep in the mountains. Instead, he lounged on a backyard deck, played in a pond, and shared meals with his human family. But Brutus's story didn't start here. It began many years earlier, when a wildlife enthusiast named Casey Anderson stumbled upon a tiny, orphaned bear cub who had lost his mother. The cub, no more than a few weeks old, had been found in a wildlife park, too young to survive on his own. Casey, who had spent his life studying and working with animals, knew that without intervention, the cub would not make it. He watched as the small creature wobbled on unsteady legs, its round eyes full of curiosity but also fear. Something inside Casey told him he had to act. Bringing home a grizzly bear, even a tiny one, was no small decision. Bears were wild animals, not pets, and raising one came with enormous challenges. But Casey was not just any animal lover. He was a conservationist and wildlife expert who had spent years studying bear behavior. With the right environment, care, and training, he believed he could give the cub a life that was both safe and enriching. And so, he named him Brutus. At first, Brutus was small enough to fit in Casey's arms, weighing no more than a few pounds. He had a thick coat of brown fur, oversized paws, and an appetite that seemed insatiable. Casey set up a special enclosure for him, making sure he had plenty of space to explore and play. But it didn't take long for Casey to realize something extraordinary. Brutus wasn't just any bear. He was incredibly social, affectionate, and seemed to crave human interaction in a way that was unusual for his species. He followed Casey everywhere, much like a loyal dog would. If Casey sat down, Brutus would plop beside him. If Casey ran, Brutus would chase him playfully. And when Casey spoke, the bear would tilt his head, as if truly listening. The bond they formed was undeniable. As weeks turned into months, Brutus grew, and fast. What started as a cub small enough to be carried soon became a rambunctious young bear, strong enough to topple furniture with a single playful swipe. Despite his size, his personality remained gentle. He loved splashing in the pond that Casey had built for him, rolling in the grass, and even curling up beside Casey when he sat outside. Casey trained Brutus using positive reinforcement, never treating him as a pet, but rather as an intelligent companion who needed guidance. Brutus learned hand signals, responded to commands, and even understood boundaries, though sometimes he still acted like an oversized puppy. One particularly memorable moment came when Casey brought Brutus to his home's deck for the first time. The bear, now several hundred pounds but still playful, spotted Casey's dog, a golden retriever named Buck. To everyone's surprise, instead of seeing Buck as prey or competition, Brutus wagged his stubby tail and bounced toward the dog with pure excitement. Buck, though hesitant at first, soon realized Brutus meant no harm, and before long, the two became inseparable. They chased each other around the yard, splashed in the pond together, and even lay side by side in the shade after a long day of play. Brutus truly believed he was one of the family. Of course, not everyone understood Casey's unique relationship with Brutus. Some questioned whether raising a grizzly bear in close proximity to humans was safe. Others doubted that such a large predator could ever be truly domesticated. Casey, however, remained firm in his belief. He wasn't trying to make Brutus a pet. He was giving him a home where he could thrive without fear of exploitation or harm. And Brutus, in turn, had proven time and time again that he was not just a wild bear. He was something more, a friend, a family member, a grizzly with the heart of a dog. Part 2. Growing up grizzly. Brutus was no longer a small cub, but he still acted like one. At just a year old, he had already surpassed the size of a large dog, yet his playful nature remained the same. He still followed Casey wherever he went, still tumbled around with Buck, the family's golden retriever, and still begged for treats with an innocence that made it easy to forget he was a growing predator. But as Brutus grew, so did the challenges of raising him. One morning, as Casey prepared breakfast, he heard a loud crash from the backyard. Rushing outside, he found Brutus sitting amid the wreckage of what had once been a wooden picnic table, looking completely unbothered. The bear had leaned on it a little too hard, and the entire structure had collapsed under his weight. Casey sighed. "Brutus, buddy, you're getting too big for this." The bear simply chuffed in response, nudging a piece of broken wood with his nose before rolling onto his back like an overgrown puppy. Despite his size, Brutus remained incredibly gentle. He had learned boundaries early on: no swiping with claws, no aggressive roughhousing, and no sneaking into the house. Not that he didn't try, but even with those rules in place, raising an 800-pound bear required constant vigilance. Casey worked tirelessly to make sure Brutus had the space and stimulation he needed. He expanded his outdoor enclosure, built platforms for climbing, and even constructed a massive artificial pond so Brutus could swim whenever he wanted. Sarah, Casey's wife, watched the bond between them with fascination. "It's like he's not just a bear," she mused one evening, watching Brutus chase Buck around the yard. "He's something else." Casey smiled. "Yeah, he's a bear that thinks he's a dog." Part 2. Growing up Grizzly. Brutus was no longer a small cub, but he still acted like one. At just a year old, he had already surpassed the size of a large dog, yet his playful nature remained the same. He still followed Casey wherever he went, still tumbled around with Buck, the family's golden retriever, and still begged for treats with an innocence that made it easy to forget he was a growing predator. But as Brutus grew, so did the challenges of raising him. One morning, as Casey prepared breakfast, he heard a loud crash from the backyard. Rushing outside, he found Brutus sitting amid the wreckage of what had once been a wooden picnic table, looking completely unbothered. The bear had leaned on it a little too hard, and the entire structure had collapsed under his weight. Casey sighed. "Brutus, buddy, you're getting too big for this." The bear simply chuffed in response, nudging a piece of broken wood with his nose before rolling onto his back like an overgrown puppy. Despite his size, Brutus remained incredibly gentle. He had learned boundaries early on: no swiping with claws, no aggressive roughhousing, and no sneaking into the house. Not that he didn't try, but even with those rules in place, raising an 800-pound bear required constant vigilance. Casey worked tirelessly to make sure Brutus had the space and stimulation he needed. He expanded his outdoor enclosure, built platforms for climbing, and even constructed a massive artificial pond so Brutus could swim whenever he wanted. Sarah, Casey's wife, watched the bond between them with fascination. "It's like he's not just a bear," she mused one evening, watching Brutus chase Buck around the yard. "He's something else." Casey smiled. "Yeah, he's a bear that thinks he's a dog." Part 4. A life of freedom and friendship. With Brutus's increasing size came more media attention. News outlets marveled at the fact that an 800-pound grizzly lived harmoniously with a human family. Wildlife organizations reached out, some applauding Casey's unique approach, while others questioned the ethics of raising a bear outside of the wild. Brutus had settled into his new home at the wildlife sanctuary, but despite the vastness of his environment, he never strayed too far from Casey. Their bond, forged in trust and companionship, remained as strong as ever. Even with acres of land to explore, Brutus still greeted Casey every morning, waiting near the gate as if expecting their daily routine to continue. Casey never claimed that Brutus was domesticated. He was not a pet. He was a bear with instincts and needs that had to be respected. But he was also living proof that these creatures were not mindless predators. Often sat with him, just outside the enclosure, talking to him the way he always had. "You know, buddy," he'd say, tossing Brutus a treat, "you've got all this space, but you still act like you're just hanging out in the backyard." Brutus became a symbol, helping to educate the public about grizzlies. He participated in educational programs, demonstrating bear behavior in controlled environments. At one such event, Casey explained, "Brutus isn't just a bear who grew up with humans. He's a bridge, helping people understand that these animals are intelligent, emotional, and deserving of respect." In response, would huff contentedly and flop down beside the fence, watching Casey as if he understood every word. Brutus seemed to enjoy the attention. He would sit patiently as Casey spoke to crowds, occasionally looking at him as if waiting for his cue. During one interview, he even let out a low, soft growl when Casey mentioned his love for peanut butter, making the audience burst into laughter. Despite the fame, Casey always ensured Brutus's well-being came first. The bear had his own space, plenty of enrichment activities, and most importantly, the freedom to be himself. The big moved Brutus's role as an ambassador for Grizzlies. As Brutus reached full maturity, it became clear that he needed even more space. Though he loved being close to his human family, Casey knew it was time to give him a home that matched his massive size, and natural instincts continued to thrive. His role as an ambassador for Grizzlies became even more significant. With Casey leading educational programs at the sanctuary, people from all over came to learn about bears, not as feared predators, but as intelligent, emotional creatures. So, he built a wildlife sanctuary. Visitors were in awe of Brutus's size, but even more captivated by his gentle nature. He had a way of shifting people's perceptions, helping them see that grizzlies were not the mindless monsters they were often portrayed to be. The new sanctuary spanned several acres of protected land, complete with natural ponds, trees for climbing, and wide open areas where Brutus could roam. It was a place where he could live as close to the wild as possible while still being cared for. Casey often emphasized, bears like Brutus belong in the wild, but circumstances led us here. Now, his story helps protect others like him. The transition wasn't easy. At first, Brutus seemed unsure, lingering near the fence line, waiting for Casey, but with time, he began to embrace his new home. Exploring the vast space with curiosity, Brutus's presence helped bring attention to conservation efforts, funding for wildlife rehabilitation, and greater awareness about the human impact on bear populations. He became the face of advocacy for his species, showing that respect, not fear, was the key to coexistence. Casey visited every day, maintaining their bond while allowing Brutus the freedom he deserved. One afternoon, as Casey sat by the fence watching him, Brutus lumbered over, sat beside him, and let out a familiar huff. Casey smiled. "Yeah, I miss having you around too, buddy." A moment that touched the world. Even though Brutus now had a new home, their friendship remained unchanged. One particular moment between Casey and Brutus gained international attention when a film crew captured a candid interaction. It was a quiet afternoon, and Casey sat near Brutus's favorite pond, watching him splash lazily in the water. Then, without warning, Brutus lumbered over and did something remarkable. He sat beside Casey and leaned his massive head against his shoulder. The moment was pure, unscripted, and deeply touching. An 800-pound grizzly, capable of great strength, displaying a level of trust and affection that stunned viewers worldwide. The clip went viral, sparking debates, discussions, and even more interest in bear conservation. Casey and Brutus became symbols of the incredible connections possible between humans and animals, reinforcing the message that respect and understanding could bridge even the wildest of worlds. The everlasting bond. Years passed, and Brutus remained a central part of Casey's life. Though he had the space to be a bear, he never truly left the companionship he had known since he was a cub. Each day, he greeted Casey with the same enthusiasm, the same playful demeanor, proving that some bonds were unbreakable. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Casey sat by the fence, watching Brutus wander through the golden light. He had grown older, his once dark fur now streaked with hints of silver, but his spirit remained the same. "You've had a good life, haven't you, buddy?" Casey mused aloud. Brutus turned, locking eyes with him for a long moment before letting out a deep, content sigh. A silent understanding passed between them, one that needed no words. Brutus had been given a second chance at life, one that allowed him to be both wild and loved. And in return, he had given Casey something just as valuable, a lifelong friendship that defied expectations and proved that even the wildest hearts could hold kindness. Part 5. A legacy that lives on. Brutus had lived an extraordinary life, one that defied expectations, changed perceptions, and touched the hearts of thousands. For over a decade, he remained a central part of Casey's world, an ambassador for his species and a symbol of what true companionship between humans and animals could look like. But time is an unstoppable force, even for the strongest of creatures. As the years passed, Brutus's once powerful frame grew slower, his playful energy softened by age. His fur, once thick and dark, carried streaks of silver, and his movements became more deliberate, more thoughtful. Casey knew his friend was entering his twilight years, and he made sure every moment was filled with care, love, and dignity. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped low over the Montana landscape, Brutus lay by the pond, watching the golden hues shimmer on the water's surface. Casey sat beside him, resting a hand on the bear's massive shoulder. "You've done more than I ever could have imagined, buddy," he murmured. "You changed the world." Brutus let out a deep sigh, his eyes soft and knowing. Though he could not speak, there was something in his gaze that told Casey he understood. Not long after, Brutus passed peacefully, surrounded by the land he called home and the man who had loved him since the day he was rescued. His loss was deeply felt, not just by Casey, but by the countless people whose lives he had touched through his story. Brutus's impact on the world. Though Brutus was gone, his legacy remained. His story continued to inspire, educate, and ignite passion for wildlife conservation. The sanctuary Casey built in his honor expanded, providing a haven for other rescued bears and wild animals in need. His influence reached classrooms, documentaries, and conservation efforts worldwide, proving that one bear could make a difference in how people saw his species. Casey continued his work, sharing Brutus's story whenever he could. "He wasn't just a bear," he would say. "He was my best friend, and he showed the world that bears, like all creatures, deserve respect, love, and understanding." People from all over visited the sanctuary, some just to see where Brutus had lived, others to carry on his mission of wildlife preservation. His paw prints remained imprinted not just in the dirt of Montana, but in the hearts of those who believed in a world where humans and animals could coexist in harmony. The spirit of Brutus lives on. On quiet evenings, Casey still found himself looking out toward the woods, half expecting to see his old friend watching from the tree line. And in many ways, Brutus never truly left. His spirit lived on in the sanctuary, in the stories told around campfires, in the lessons he had taught about kindness, coexistence, and the undeniable bond between man and nature. One night, as Casey sat by the pond, he thought he heard a familiar chuff in the wind, a soft sound carrying through the trees. He smiled, looking up at the stars. "Good night, buddy." Brutus may have been gone, but his story, his impact, would never fade. Brutus was more than just a bear. He was a symbol of love, trust, and the powerful connection between humans and animals. His legacy lives on through conservation efforts and the countless lives he touched. What do you think of this incredible friendship? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more inspiring animal stories. See you in the next adventure.